You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 28, the Microsoft Surface Pro. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Chris Sims. On today's show, we talked to Philip Hansen from the Stone Pages podcast about the Surface Pro as a field device. He's got a Surface Pro 3, I've got a Surface Pro 4. Let's get to the show. Welcome to the show, everyone. Today we are going to talk about the Surface Pro tablet from Microsoft, as I mentioned in the introduction. Is it good for fieldwork? How robust is it? And what can it do? What can it do? And everything else that we can think of to really talk about this thing as a device that will enhance or not archaeology. So before we start, though, and I didn't write this in my notes, but I do want to mention, we did say Microsoft, and it is running Windows 10, which we'll get into. But so far, I haven't seen anything related to service packs or anything like that. So hopefully, this will be a little more stable device for Microsoft as opposed to stuff in the past. I mean, I'm a Mac person, personally, so it's my first Microsoft device, I think, in probably 15 years. And it's definitely a change. But to help us do this, we're bringing on a special guest because him and I started talking about this when we were talking about something else. We just happened to mention, oh, yeah, I think I had one. I think you could see mine. And we started talking about our Surface Pros, and he had one and I had one. And we decided to do a whole show on this. So Philip Hansen is our guest, and he's coming to us over from, I don't know where you're at right now. Over in the UK, where are you, Philip?
I'm at the University of Sheffield.
That's right.
So I guess for all the people who don't know me, which is probably quite a lot, my name is Philip Hansen. I have a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Aarhus, where I studied medieval and Renaissance archaeology, and I'm currently doing my MA in medieval archaeology at the University of Sheffield. Apart from that, I also host the Stone Pages Archaeo News podcast, which is, I believe, the oldest prehistoric news podcast ever, and was previously hosted by David Connolly, and now I took over. So here I am.
Awesome. And David Connolly, in case anybody doesn't recognize that name, he is Badger, the British Archaeological Jobs and Resources website. So he is the man behind probably one of the best, most well-known job posting sites, I would almost say, in the world. I mean, it seems like everybody knows about Badger for some reason. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and it's a great website for that jobs too. Just the amount that gets posted on there. It doesn't make it seem like it's hard to find jobs in archaeology when you just read all those posts.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get into this, just I mentioned it in the introduction, but we've got our co-host Chris Sims on, of course, and he is from his car somewhere on the eastern seaboard somewhere. Chris, where are you at these days?
Hey, I am somewhere between West Virginia and Lexington, Kentucky on Interstate 64 right now. Blasting westward toward my home in Louisville.
Nice. A lot of people listen to podcasts in the car, but a very small percentage actually create podcasts in the car, so that's awesome. Yeah, I'm
an innovator. What can I say? That's why we're on Archaeotech.
Absolutely. So
Don't
if we
podcast and drive.
So if we lose Chris or your audio gets a little crazy, that's why. So we're doing the best we can here, and it's awesome for him to. A lot of people would just cancel when they can't make it, but I appreciate it when people like Bill White on the CRM podcast. He's podcasted from the most ridiculous locations, and so it's great to have you here. So Chris is going to play a little bit of either devil's advocate or the sort of questioner on this because he doesn't have a Surface Pro and he's never used one. They're relatively new devices, really. I mean, Microsoft kind of quietly launched them, and they've been around for a few years. But I feel like just in the last 6 months to a year, they've really started to gain a lot more media attention, and maybe that's because of they're a little more powerful and they're they're a little bigger, and then maybe they're doing more things. And then there was the Surface Book that they released last 6 months ago, and that probably changed things. So before we start. Philip and I are going to talk about what devices we have so you guys know where we're coming from, because unlike I would say iPads, where really the only thing that you can change on the iPad is whether or not, from when you buy it. You can't change this. I mean, you buy it, it's like it is, but your options for buying them are, Wi-Fi or cellular, and then the size, 32 gig, 64, 128, and they've got 256 gigabyte ones now. But the Surface Pro is a computer. It's a tablet, but it's a computer. Even Microsoft sees it as a computer. My Office 365 account won't let me count it as a tablet, which I called Microsoft and complained about that. And they're like, sorry, we treat it as a computer, even though they bill it and sell it as a tablet. So, but anyway, let's talk about our Surface Pros, and we'll go We'll go numerically here, because Philip has a Surface Pro 3. So why don't you tell us a little bit of the specs about your Surface Pro 3 so people know where we're coming from.
All right, cool. Well, I'm using, as Chris said, the Surface Pro 3, which has an Intel Core i5 4300. If that means anything to you, 1.9 gigahertz, 4 gigabyte RAM, 64-bit OS, and then it has touch support with 10 touch points, and you can use the pen with it as well. Generally fantastic. I like it, and I use it for all of my notes when I'm in class. So.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And I think we have the same screen size too. I don't know if they changed that. I actually don't know what my screen size is, but it's a very wide, sort of 16:9 aspect ratio screen, but it's pretty big. I'd say it's probably 12 inches across.
Yeah, probably same as mine. The reason I bought mine was that I read that it isn't bigger than an A4 paper sheet, which is slightly bigger than that, but it's a nice, comfortable size.
Nice. Oddly enough, they don't mention that over here in the United States because nobody knows what A4 paper is.
Oh, all right, yeah. It's standard printer paper for everybody else.
Right. Well, we accomplished the same amount with less words, so we have smaller paper.
Okay.
Okay, so I've got the Surface Pro 4. That's the latest one that just came out, and I actually bought mine about a month, maybe a couple weeks before the Core i7s were going to be available, but I was in a situation where I was like, forget it, I'm just going to buy this one now. And they're not cheap, by the way. The Core i7 was, it was close to, I think, $1,700 base price, US dollars. So, but anyway, mine's a Core i5 6300, and yours is the 4300. This is the first time I've seen this number after the mention of the chipset, because I'm not actually even sure what that means. Like everything in computing, I'm guessing a higher number is better than a lower number, but I'm not actually sure how that's tied to the Core i5. Because then, yeah, exactly. I have no idea. So then it's a 2.4 gigahertz processor. I've got 8 gigabytes of RAM. Again, a 64-bit OS and the touch support with 10 points. And we both have something Philip didn't mention, the pen. The pen that for the Surface Pro 4 has one of those really powerful rare earth magnets along the whole edge of it. There's a flat edge, and it just magnetizes along the side of the tablet. And it's such a powerful magnet, you can practically hold the tablet up with the pen if you just grab onto it. It's not a light tablet, so it's pretty good little magnet system there. And we'll get into the pen too, because they've changed that a little bit. In fact, as we're setting this up, why don't you tell us, Philip, about your pen, like what the buttons it has and how you attach it to your device? Because that's important for people to consider when they're taking these things into the field, is how does this, am I going to lose this pen? Where do I have to put it? How does it attach, and what kind of buttons does it have? So tell us about yours, because I know mine's a little bit different.
My pen it's a just standard pen size, not much bigger than your average pen, and it has, of course, the tip. It has a purple button on the back, which is not the eraser. That if you click that, it opens OneNote on your tablet, which is great, especially if you have it on lock screen. You can just click that once and then quickly write something down, or you can hold it down and take a screenshot. Apart from that, I have two buttons, where the lower button is the erase button, and the upper button is the right-click button, if I remember correctly. And I think you can actually switch those in some programs.
Okay.
The magnet for mine is not all that powerful. I can definitely not hold up the device with it. And I actually have a case on it to make sure that it stays in place when I'm not using the pen, which I'll talk about a little bit later, because the case that I have for it is really, really good, and it's also available for the Surface Pro 4.
Okay. All right. Well, my pen is similar in function, although they've changed things around a little bit. And this is not exactly intuitive once you first use it, but I love it once I got used to it. But we'll start with the eraser end, which is also a button for me, and also opens OneNote right when you push the button. Even if the device, as long as if it's not off completely, but sleeping, I guess, with the screen off, you push that and it wakes it up and turns on OneNote, which is pretty amazing. I like that for quick note taking and doing different things. And then also, down the flat side where the magnet is, there's kind of a tacky plastic strip right there, and almost a rubbery strip. And at the end of that is where the other button is. So if you're holding the pen naturally with your index finger, your first finger on that end, that's your second click, basically your right click button. And if you hold that down and the end, that is a screenshot. Now, one of the cool things about this pen is in OneNote, and I would imagine other programs that support it, the quote unquote eraser end is actually an eraser, which is pretty sweet. I actually was just screwing around when I first got this, and I was using a pen, and I don't think I was screwing around. I just did it naturally because, I'm 41 now, and I've been using pencils and stuff my whole life. So I flipped it around and it actually erased, to my surprise. So that's a pretty neat little trick that it does. Plus, as I experienced a few months ago, and as Philip experienced recently, the tips are replaceable. So the tips are actually quite fragile, and I was pretty pissed off because my pen jumped off my tablet because I hit it getting out of the vehicle at a Starbucks down in Ridgecrest, California, and it landed on the concrete, tipped down, and shattered the little plastic casing around the tip. It still worked, but it was off. Like the digital point on the tablet where it would contact and where the tip actually contact were off by a few millimeters, which was really disconcerting. And I thought I was going to have to replace the pen. I didn't know the tips actually came out, and they come out quite easily too. But for I think it was $10 US, I was able to buy a new packet of tips, and they came with different shapes and sizes. So that was pretty easy. But the tips over there where you got them, Philip, were a little more expensive, weren't they?
Yeah, European prices. So I paid $40, I think, roughly for mine with shipping and handling when everything came to be. Mm-hmm. I will actually say what you did with your pen was actually the thing that I did with my pen for the Surface Pro 3. I just flipped it around and tried using the back end as an eraser, and the guy who was showing me the product said, "Oh, no, that's not how you use it. The eraser's down here at the point," which I thought was very counterintuitive. So I'm glad that they actually fixed that, because I always thought that was kind of silly when you were using the pen at first. So.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like to see a screenshot or something. I need to look up the pen that you've got, because I want to know if they enhanced the look of the button on the back of the pen to look like eraser. Because looking at it to me right now, I mean, it actually looks like an eraser, and that will make you just mentally want to flip this thing around, and which is probably why I did it. It seemed very intuitive for me to do that.
I mean, it is a very different color from the rest of the pen. The rest of the pen, for the people who haven't seen them, is a silver gray color, and then the backmost button is purple. So it does kind of resemble an eraser on a number 2 pencil, for example. So.
Well, and mine's not actually purple. It's gray like the rest of the plastic parts, aside from the silver body. Mine's actually gray. So, and I know, and maybe that's because I know for the Surface Pro 4, I'm not sure about the 3, but you can actually buy different pens. I think they're $50 US or $50 or $60. You can buy new pens of different colors. I saw a purple pen. I saw a black pen. I've seen a handful of other colors, but you can pick those up if you want. But the one that it comes with is the silvery gray one. All right, so one other accessory while we're still talking about the hardware is the keyboard. And again, I had to buy this separately, and I bought it with the thing. It's, coming from an iPad, the keyboard on the iPad is amazing. It comes up when you need it to come up. I really like it. It's easy to type on. The on-screen keyboard on the Surface Pro 4 has pissed me off more than a few times. It doesn't come up when you need it to come up. Sometimes you have to call it to come up, and that might be because of tablet mode, which I'll talk about later. But when I'm in just regular computer desktop mode and I want the keyboard to come up, like I click into if I don't have the keyboard connected, which, by the way, it connects on one of the long ends, the opposite end of the camera, with some really powerful magnets. So the keyboard connects really fast, and it's instantly connected at that point too. It's not like a Bluetooth connection. It's just instantly connected via that hard connection on the bottom. And it's kind of raised up a little bit too, which I also like. It's better for typing. But anyway, the on-screen keyboard is a huge piece of crap as far as I can tell. It's not intuitive. The keys aren't laid out right. It just feels really weird, and I don't like doing it. And I can't split the keyboard in half like I can on the iPad and just type with my thumbs and still get it fairly accurate. But the physical keyboard as well. Let me talk about that real quick. I'll talk about what I like about it. It's super light. It's kind of got this almost suede feel to it. The keys are well spaced. The keys actually feel quite good. It's got a lot of functionality. It's got the escape key and all that stuff. Whereas iPads don't have escape keys because there's no functionality for it. You can dim. It's backlit, so I can change the brightness on the keys. It's got that Windows button. It's got all kinds of neat little things on it, and it's got a pretty decent sized mouse pad too on the Surface Pro 4. It's about the same aspect ratio as the screen is, so it's really wide and there's a lot of space there. The thing I don't like about the keyboard, the mouse pad, is it's super cheap. It doesn't seem to work that well sometimes. It works mostly well, but I also find myself just touching the screen and using the pen most of the time because I don't like the mouse pad. So I don't know. I've got some issues with the keyboard, and when I get along with this, I might look at some aftermarket third-party keyboards for these things to see if there's anything better out there. My guess is they would be Bluetooth, unless they've managed to make them connect into the hard system down here. But how do you like the keyboard on yours? I don't know if you got the factory keyboard with it or what you're doing.
I actually didn't bother buying the keyboard because I just bought a Bluetooth one,
Smart man.
which I don't use a lot, and because I generally travel with a laptop and my tablet because I'm a rich white kid, I don't feel a need to use, like, if I need to do something that specific, I'll use my laptop and not my tablet. But actually, I haven't had a lot of trouble with the keyboard on the screen anyways. I will admit that sometimes it does actually cover up, like, it doesn't always fit all the web pages. Some web pages I can see are made for, they'll slide up text boxes when you need them, but sometimes I have to move the keyboard around, which is slightly annoying. But so far I like it. The Bluetooth keyboard I have is all right, but it just runs out of battery really fast, so I tend not to use it.
Now, what do you think? Now, you mentioned having to move the keyboard around, so I know I've got several options with keyboard on mine, which is one, I can have and they're actually different keyboards to use too. So I can have the keyboard that you can detach from the bottom and kind of move around and resize a little bit, and I understand that. But there's also the style of keyboard that just pops up from the bottom of the screen, and like you said, if I'm typing in a text box that happens to be near the bottom of the screen and I click into there and then open the keyboard, it just covers the text box, which is a totally stupid thing to do from a developer standpoint. Why doesn't it raise up the entire thing so I can still see where I'm typing? I've got to go in there and take that now smaller space, because it's only half the screen, and move the page up that I'm trying to type in or something like that. And I know with Apple, with iPad, it nearly always moves it up appropriately, right? It almost always gets it right. So, yeah.
Chris, can I burst your bubble for a bit? When you're using the keyboard, in the lower right corner where the keys are, I have one where I can split it up into two sides so I can just use my thumbs.
Wait, what? Let me see here. Now, I've got a keyboard button here.
Yeah, if you push that, then right next to the arrows in the lower right corner, there should be one where you can pick.
You're totally right.
That's actually where the pen comes in nice too. If you have really nice handwriting, it can actually recognize your handwriting as letters, and it will improve over time. So if you have really bad handwriting, it will also learn how to read your handwriting, which is great for me.
Right. Yeah, well, now I remember seeing this split keyboard, but maybe I just hate it so much, the keyboard on this thing, the on-screen keyboard, that I just never use it.
Yeah.
But I know that button now. And you're right. I did want to mention the handwriting recognition in the little keyboard below. I like that probably most of the time, but again, it does some weird things that are not very intuitive. Like it does predictive text above what you're handwriting, so you can just write out a whole sentence if you want and see if you can hopefully get it right and get it lucky. But if you're doing like one word at a time, if I like write in a word and then I tap on what it's suggesting that word actually is, it doesn't add a space after that word. You have to go over and specifically hit the space button, which is, again, one of those things that is just dumb. Why wouldn't I want space after that word? Why do I have to manually do that? So.
Yeah, it has some teething problems, I think. I think a lot of it also comes with the fact that it is marketed as a replacement for a computer rather than a tablet. Mm-hmm. So because of the fact that it also works with standard computer programs, you can't make like every program just kind of resize to the keyboard.
Yeah.
If you get what I mean. I think that's the big issue with it. But I definitely do agree that it is annoying as all heck at times.
Well, and something that might fix that, because I haven't actually played this much, because a lot of the programs I use on this are designed for desktop computers. I don't use a lot of really kind of tablet-esque programs, which is why I bought this. So, but if you slide over from the right-hand side, you get kind of the action center, they call it, with the different buttons on there for quickly turning on and off the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, location services, stuff like that, brightness. But you can go into tablet mode, which makes every app that you start up full screen automatically. And that might, since I haven't used it much, I don't know, but that might change some functionality on the keyboard and the usage of that, but it's something I'd have to experiment with more. Have you used tablet mode much on yours?
I only pretty much use tablet mode on mine, and I haven't really seen any discernible difference. Actually, most of my annoyances come from using it in tablet mode, especially with the keyboard. So I don't think it makes any difference at all.
All right, well, we're at the end of the first segment here, and I think we're done talking about the hardware. So let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and get into some functionality issues with this thing.
All these things we make no apology are the study of archaeology. But we don't do dinosaurs.
Did aliens build Stonehenge? Did the Easter Island statues walk? Did the Vikings colonize Midwest America? What does mainstream archaeology have to say about all of this? Listen to the Archaeological Fantasies podcast and learn about popular archaeological mysteries. Hoax or fact? Learn to tell the difference with Dr. Kenneth Fader and co-host Sarah of the Archae Fantasies blog. Check out the show on iTunes and Stitcher Radio and at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Archae Fantasies and get ready to think critically. Let's get back to the show.
Funny beady blokes you will see are a staple of archaeology.
All right, we're back, and before we get into some apps and actually using these things, we need to talk about, because if you're gonna bring this into the field, which is why we're talking to this on the Archaeo Tech podcast, you're probably not going to want to bring it in the field the way it comes out of the box, the way I've got mine, and I haven't used mine as a field device yet. I've used it as a quote-unquote field device for podcasting, which means, and I'll mention that real fast, how easy this was, because I took just this tablet and my iPad Air to the SAAs last week, or 2 weeks ago from when this podcast comes out. And that was in Orlando, and it was the first time I'd gone anywhere, really on any trip away from home, where I didn't bring a laptop. And that's what tells me this is truly a laptop replacement device, because I was able to pretty easily, I could tether this to my iPhone because internet at Disney World was ridiculous, and it was going to apparently cost $100,000 for the SAAs to buy us all Wi-Fi, which, while they have the money, and I think they should have, or not choose a place where it's going to cost $100,000 for Wi-Fi, this is a different conversation. But anyway, I was able to easily tether my phone to it for Wi-Fi, and then I have an H4n Zoom recorder that I use in the field, and I was able to record interviews at the SAAs on that, and then simply just plug in the little cord on the side here and plug it into the USB slot on the side of my Surface Pro 4. By the way, I have a USB slot, a regular USB slot, a mini display port spot, which for anybody who has Apple knows what that looks like, and also a micro SD card slot back there, which is pretty handy. I've used all those things. But anyway, I was able to plug the H4n just like a device and pull the WAV files off and then edit my podcast using full Adobe Audition, which is pretty impressive, and post them onto the website the same day that I took the interviews. So it was all pretty simple, and the device is small enough and light enough that it was easy to carry around in my backpack all day, and I didn't mind it. But what I should have had, if I'd been carrying it around, just like out, was a case on it, some kind of case, and I don't have that. But Philip, you've got a case. Why don't you tell us about that? And all these things will be in the show notes, so you can go see this stuff. So, well, let's tell us about your case and what you like and don't like about it.
All right. Well, I have the case from an American company called Urban Armor Gear, and they make cases for not just Surface Pro 3s, but also the 4s, and actually a wide range of cell phones. And they're good, rugged cases. They market them as being fairly light, which I guess relatively they are. I haven't really checked out any other cases, but you can definitely feel a difference when you take the case off and just hold the Surface on its own, that it does lose a a few hundred grams. But it's a really, really great case, really grippy on the back, so you're always securely holding it. It leaves enough space open for the cameras and for the speakers and for all of your ports and the intakes on the side as well. So your Surface Pro won't overheat and you won't lose access to any of the ports with the exception of the SD one. And I never really used that anyway, so for me it's not a big problem, but I guess for some people it could be.
I noticed the Surface Pro 4 case has a little kickstand thing off the back of it. That's one of the things we didn't mention is I really like half of the back of the Surface Pro 4 kind of is a really strong, sturdy metal panel, basically flap almost, that comes out and acts as a stand that is rigid enough to set in almost any position. You can almost lay the tablet completely flat and then come almost completely straight up and down as well, and any point in between. But it's not rigid enough to where it's inconvenient. It actually moves pretty fluidly when you want to move it, but then stays put when you want it to stay put. First off, is the Surface Pro 3 like that? And does the kickstand on the case work just as well, or is it more of a few positions?
The Surface Pro 3 works like that as well. I'm a bit nervous always using it flipped completely out just because I'm very paranoid about stuff breaking.
Yeah.
But it does work like that. I actually tend to use it in, I guess, portrait mode rather than landscape a lot, so I don't use the stand. Mm-hmm. The case that I have actually does have a foot like that. You just lose, I think, the last two settings, so you can't put it down as flat as you would be able to out of the case. I should also mention just something that I saw. The Surface Pro 4 version of this case actually has what looks like a clip bar for the pen, which mine actually doesn't, which I mentioned earlier. It has a lip at the bottom for where the keyboard would go, and that's actually usually where I set my pen when I'm not using it, because then it kind of has something to rest on and doesn't fall off immediately.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that's really cool. I like that, and I'm looking at them online here, and I like the little clip up there for the pen.
Yeah, and they cost $70 for both of them, so I definitely say get them. I love using mine, and it's not a great inconvenience at all.
Mm-hmm. Outstanding. Yeah, I see that $70 US here. They've got black and red, which they call magma, and then blue. So,
Right. Philip,
yeah.
I have one question. With the case that you use, is your case like dust and waterproof, or is that still a vulnerability with that case?
They market it as being dust and waterproof, or at least on the back it should be. I haven't been outside using it in soaking rain yet, even though I live in England, which I know is surprising. But I have actually used it out in the backwoods in Denmark, and I did get some dust on it, and I just kind of wiped it off with my hand. And I also use it in my everyday. I take it to school and I take it home and I sit with it at home sometimes, and it works. I haven't had any cracks on it yet or any problems with my Surface Pro, just because it is a really, really good case. So, but I am planning to do some more field work in the future, taking clay samples and such, and it will definitely be coming with me out in the field for those adventures.
Okay, well, let's get into some of the stuff you'll be using in the field, because you've definitely done a little bit more of that than I have. Actually, a lot more of that than I have from the field standpoint. Let's get into some of the apps you use. We're going to have an app of the day segment at the end of this where we kind of really take a deep dive into a couple of apps. But in the meantime, let's just kind of, what are your kind of go-to applications for this that you really find that the Surface Pro shines for, that you can use in the field?
Well, mostly I actually used mine for map info. I had a excavation that I did a couple of years ago as part of my BA in Denmark, and I got the Surface Pro for that idea because normally when I'm using the program in question, which is map info, it's a standard GIS program, kind of like ArcGIS. Just apparently that's most of what we use in Denmark is map info. Mm-hmm. So it works pretty well. I use MapInfo 10, and as far as I can see, it works. I already had all the images rastered, so I didn't have to do much about the points. But it worked. The biggest problem is that the GUI doesn't scale, and that's probably because it's from what looks like Windows XP or Vista days, so it wasn't around for this tablet. So the GUI is kind of crap. as well as if you open the layer control, the window that you're actually using becomes very, very small, almost to the point where it's unusable.
Right.
So that is something to be wary of. And I actually did try closing the layer window while using it and then making the window bigger again, and I just could not do that. I had to shut down the entire program and restart it. So that was really annoying, actually.
Well, I've noticed a couple applications that it does that too, where everything shows up just ridiculously tiny, and it makes me wonder if you're right. I think they were created for slightly lower resolution screens, and this is such a high resolution screen that those few pixels that those icons are created with end up being ridiculously small. So I've wondered about actually decreasing the screen resolution within the tablet. If it's a program you use all the time, I wonder if that would help. Have you tried anything like that?
No, I haven't actually, but I'll have to do that. Thanks for the suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually also been looking into maybe using it with a second screen, which I know isn't great for the field, but if you're at home and you're drawing stuff from the field, technically I guess you could duplicate the screen and then use that as kind of, to get an idea of where you're drawing, which might also help with the GUI scaling, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, one of the things we didn't mention when we were talking about hardware, which I want to mention now because you're talking about using map info, and theoretically you could be recording some sensitive material with this, and something that people might be thinking about is security of the device. So, I know a lot of the Apple devices these days have fingerprint security. Well, there's no button on the screen for this, so on some of now it's a keyboard. I'd have to look it up, and maybe we'll put this in the show notes. But there's a keyboard that I think is available for the Surface Pro 3 in back, which has a fingerprint sensor on the keyboard. It's right next to the trackpad. I think it's on the right side. But it's got a little fingerprint sensor, so you can have biometric security basically. So you fingerprint sign in, which is nice. But also the Surface Pro 4, and again, I'm not sure if this is specific to the 4, but the 4 definitely has, so it's got front and rear facing cameras, which we also didn't mention. And the front camera has this interesting little red light sensor that comes up when I sign in now. I only started using this in the last month or so because I didn't really think about it. But it's facial recognition, and it works scarily good, like in various lighting conditions with me barely looking at it and stuff like that, which makes me wonder, is that a bad thing? Because I actually haven't had anybody else try to sign in on this that maybe is a guy with no facial hair that, has short hair. Would they actually be able to sign in? Chris, you may be able to sign in right on my tablet for all I know. I have no idea. But for me, it seems to work really well. And I'd be really interested in trying out the facial recognition on some other people to see if it just didn't let them in, because I would say probably 95% of the time it works, and the 5% of the time that it doesn't work, it's because the lighting is really bad, or I'm just simply not even looking at it, like I'm not in front of it or something like that. But ordinary, I mean, it's fast too. Like when you are right in front of it, ready to use the thing, and you're deliberately trying to sign in, and you're sitting right in front of it like you would naturally. I mean, it's a half a second. I mean, it's just like, bam, it's you, and it signs you in. Otherwise, you can type in a standard password or a 4-digit key code or something like that, like typical sign-in type stuff. But Philip, do you know if yours has the facial recognition, and do you use it if it does?
I actually don't know if mine has that. I know that the facial recognition stuff is something they made with the new Windows phone, so I think mine is probably just a generation away from that. Mm-hmm. But I just use the password for my Hotmail, which I regret saying now.
Nice.
For this.
And that password is? No.
The first street you lived on and the name of your first pet.
Yeah, so the facial recognition thing, it might just be it might be a Windows 10 thing as well. Windows 10 Pro is what's running on this. I'm actually not sure. It says version 1511. I don't know what that means. But that's what's on this. And I don't know. Do you have a front-facing camera on yours as well as a back-facing camera?
Yeah, I have a front-facing and back-facing as well, and I'm also using Windows 10 Pro 1511. So I think it might just be a hardware question. That's what I think, anyways. At least I haven't gotten any updates from Microsoft that says, "Hey, by the way, your Surface Pro can now look at you."
Nice. Well, honestly, it never told me either. It wasn't part of the setup process. It wasn't part of anything. It was just I happened to see it on another podcast that I watch, a video podcast, and they mentioned the facial recognition. I was like, "Wait, what?" And I went in and tried it. Sure, set it up in 3 seconds, and it worked great. So. Anyway, let's slide back into map info real quick here. Get into some of the details of what you can do with map info. We've kind of talked about how you use it on the tablet, but in case anybody's not familiar with map info, what kind of stuff can you really do with it in the field? What kind of things are you creating?
Well, as far as using it in the field, I haven't really done that much. Generally, I use it as, like I said, a GIS program. So when we're out in the field in Denmark, we take those drawings home, and then we set up points. We have some, points for each corner of the drawing, and then we make that into JPEG, and we raster that image in map info, which we can then draw, and then it will actually give us the ability to lay out the entire field into, just so we connect all the drawings in one section. And then we can layer those. So it's actually a great tool for when you're trying to figure out what goes with what, because you can easily select and deselect layers to hide them. So that's mostly what I've been using it for. As far as anything else in the field, I don't know how great it works. I'd have to use it a bit more to say that, sadly. I haven't had the chance to use it a lot outside of excavations where we've gone back and then done post-processing a few months after the fact.
Okay. Well, and that might bring up another question for some people is how much space do you have to store in these things? Aside from the micro SD card, which kind of gives you unlimited amount of space depending on how many of those you want to carry around. I know mine has a 256 gigabyte hard drive, and which I think might have been the smallest one I could get at the time, because the next size up was, I want to say, a terabyte or something like that. It was pretty good size that you could fit in these things. And these are all solid state drives. I mean, this is a super thin device, so there's no way it's a hard drive in there. Yeah, I mean, you could really ramp these things up. You can spend well over $2,000 on a Surface Pro 4 before you even buy the keyboard, just on hardware. So it's... Yeah, I mean, you can beef up the RAM, you can beef up the processor, you can beef up the hard drive, everything to make these a really powerful computer, which, kind of begs the question, can you run stuff like Esri on this? Can you run ArcGIS or ArcMap on this thing? I'm willing to bet that you probably can. Maybe not a lot of the serious processing stuff, but I'm willing to bet you can probably run those in the field on these devices, because I will say I've run QGIS on this, and it's for doing, relatively simple things. But, I've dropped in a whole bunch of layers and done some manipulation. But again, like you were saying, and I wish I'd tried this earlier when I was really using it, a lot of the icons for QGIS were ridiculously small. They were really hard to use. It was nice to have the pen for that, because my fingers, I've got these short little fat sausage fingers, and trying to use my fingers on that stuff, or even trying to use the mouse pad, which, like I said, I avoid because I don't like it. But trying to use the pen came in really handy because it's a really fine point pen, and it was nice to be able to hit those. But I think reducing the screen resolution would probably be a solid fix for that, which we'll need to investigate. But have you used any other any other programs that you can think of that you really just enjoy on this thing?
Photoshop, for example. A lot of the stuff that I do for school primarily is editing images. So I have some maps, for example, I've used in the past where I need to erase a name, or I just kind of need to modify it a little bit so that I only get what's important for me on it. And Photoshop with the pen, again, the GUI is screwed over to a very tiny, unusable size, but with the pen, it's a lot easier. And it also just makes the entire editing process a lot easier, because trying to sit and do that with a mouse is a good way to get carpal tunnel syndrome.
Nice. Yeah, working with the pen is really nice. It's just so fluid and easy, and it's really handy. I will say one program that I tried using on this that didn't work, not very archaeological, but somebody might try it, is Adobe Premiere for video editing. It just completely crashes my device every time I try to use it. And maybe it's because I need a faster processor. Maybe my guess is it's the video graphics card, and I'm not sure about being able to upgrade that, or buy one with a better graphics card in it. Because if anybody's used Premiere, you've usually got two video windows up at the top. You've got the window for the active session that you're working in, and then you've got the video that you're extracting from to insert clips into your primary video. And I haven't even got to the point where I can actually look at the video I'm working in, but I've just loaded up a video into the temporary window, so to speak, to try to take clips from that. And I haven't been able to see anything. When you try to play the video, it's all static. And then if I even get to that point, but if I do get to that point and I hit any other button, it just completely crashes my device and restarts Windows and says you had a catastrophic error. So,
Oh, Jesus.
yeah. And Premiere is a pretty intense program. I mean, it makes my massive 27-inch 5K Retina iMac, it makes the fan kick on that when I start using it. So it's a pretty resource intensive program. I'm not going to fault the Surface Pro for not being able to handle it, but just to know that there are some things that it definitely can't handle. Like, for instance, I wouldn't probably do any gaming on this either for anybody into that, any of the hardcore things out there. I'm just not sure it's got the graphics processor to handle it. It's got a nice resolution on the screen, and the glass is really beautiful, but it's just the processing power I don't think is up there for the standard devices, but you might be able to upgrade beyond that. So
maybe, yeah. I don't know.
Well, that processing power issue makes me get to one of the questions that I've been doing on for the Surface Pro. And Philip, you might have a good answer for this. So when you're using the map info program, do you ever have issues aside from the scalability of the window? Like, do you have issues with the processing?
Not as much with the processing. I will admit that I'm a bit, if I can say it in a certain way without admitting anything, I'm a bit peg-legged in how I got the program. So I haven't been able to install it perfectly. So what I actually did was I copied over the installed version on my laptop into a folder, which I then put on my desktop, and I run it from there. And I actually do have some problems sometimes starting it up where it needs to find some files that I'll have to do manually. But I've eventually learned where those are. But other than that, I haven't really had any big troubles with as far as speed goes or layering. The only big trouble that I can remember having with it is that to close a circle or a shape, for example, you need to double click, and that's not always equally precise with the pen. So you might have to go in and do some touch up. But as like a general shape, it does it pretty well.
Well, we're going to go into our last segment here in a minute, but I just pulled up the website for the Surface Pro 4, which is the latest one, like I mentioned, and I wanted to give a couple more statistics just so people can know what we're talking about here. It looks like you can buy the cheapest one for $899. They show it with the keyboard, but I'm not quite sure that comes with the keyboard on that price. I think it's
neither am I.
$50. Yeah. So $899 is what you get for the cheapest one. It's got a 12.3-inch pixel sense display, it says here, giving you high contrast and low glare, which I'm not sure I'd buy that. I have used this outside. Yeah. It's definitely, I mean, you can go full bright on this thing, and that was one of my dislikes on it was the battery life. When I'm running this thing at full brightness and I'm doing like podcast editing or something like that, I've got probably 6 hours, which, for a laptop isn't terrible. For a tablet is terrible. I would wish it would get closer to 10 hours. And of course, if you dim it down a little bit, and maybe you're not using the keyboard, or maybe you're not using the pen much, I don't know what you're doing after that, but you can probably squeeze out 10 hours if you really start reducing functionality. But I don't know. So also it says here that the standard device weighs 1.69 pounds or 766 grams, and it's available with the Core M3, which is probably this $899 price tag, the Core i5 and the Core i7 processors. It's got a 5-megapixel front-facing camera, which isn't stellar this day and age for 2016, and an 8-megapixel autofocus rear-facing camera, which also is a little surprising. And I'm not sure if you can upgrade that or not, but 8 megapixels is kind of the low end of the spectrum these days for tablets. So that's the... that's the basic quick and dirty on the Surface Pro. It's a pretty, they talk about laptop replacements these days in tablets. And when the Surface Pro came out, the reason I picked it up is because I was looking for a laptop replacement, and it was right about the time the iPad Pro was announced, the larger iPad Pro, which is bigger than this. And I was looking at it, and I saw some early reviews on it, and I'll tell you what, the iPad Pro is simply not a laptop replacement. You still can't do... Until I can run laptop full operating system programs on it, it's simply not a replacement. And sure, there are apps that are desktop apps that they make iPad apps for and tablet apps for, but they're dumbed down. They're always dumbed down. You know, they're limited in functionality, even though the processors can probably handle it. They're limited in functionality, and it's simply not a laptop replacement. It's you know, I mean, still with Apple now you can run apps side by side. Okay, great, fantastic. On my Surface Pro 4, I can have an unlimited number of apps open. So, you know, and I can organize them however I want. And, you know, multiple screens on this thing. I can, you know, it's just everything you can imagine on a desktop, I can actually do on this. And as far as I'm concerned, it's still a tablet, despite what Microsoft will tell you. So it says right here on their front page, the tablet that can replace your laptop. And yet they still wouldn't let me call it a tablet on my Office 365 account. Those bastards.
Chris, you mentioned the thing about the multiple screens.
Yeah.
For those people who don't know, Windows 10, you can have virtual desktop, so you can have multiple screens on one laptop. Mm-hmm. But if you buy the dock that's available for the Windows, or for the Surface Pro, I think 3 and 4 as well, you can actually plug 2 other screens into it. So if you're using it at a home office, for example, you can actually have 3 screens, which are just extensions of the main screen itself, which my laptop can do, or at least I don't think it can do anyways. So that's definitely something to think about when you're buying this, is that it's not only a laptop replacement, it's actually slightly better than a standard laptop is, just screen-wise, if that's what you're into.
Yeah, I pulled that up here, and it's got a power cord on it, so you can plug into it. It's got gigabit Ethernet port, headphone jack, 2 mini display ports, and a handful of USB 3.0 ports. So it's a pretty powerful little dock here for it. Might have to look into getting one of those.
I think it's like $125, I think, for the price.
Yeah, this page
not sure on that.
Okay. Awesome. Well, let's take another break, and then we'll come back and take a slightly deeper dive into a couple apps.
The CRM Archaeology podcast brings together a panel of cultural resource management professionals to discuss the issues that really matter to the profession. Find out about networking strategies, job hunting, graduate programs, and much more. We'll often feature interviews with college professors, CRM business owners, and experts as well. Check out the show on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/CRM Arc Podcast. Let's get back to the show.
Okay, we're back, and this is going to be the App of the Day segment, and the poorly named App of the Day segment. And Philip, why don't you kick it off and tell us about PDF Maps Beta? I've used PDF Maps on my my iPad and on my iPhone, so I'm interested to hear about this for the Surface Pro.
Well, PDF Maps Beta, as it's called, it is still in beta. It's I guess it's like an early GIS app for your Windows Surface Pro, as well as just your Windows Phone in general. I think the way it's meant to be used is that ideally you should be able to go out into the field, take a point from where you're standing, describe it, take pictures of it, which you can do in the app, which I found out pretty recently. And the photos are great because it actually opens the camera in app, so it doesn't break what you're working with, and you can layer all of the points you need to take, and you can measure areas and things like that. Right now, it's free, so you can't expect too much of it, and it does have some teething problems. I tried using it in the field with my phone as a Wi-Fi, and even though it says it needs Wi-Fi signal to find you on a map, it couldn't find me at all. So you do actually have the option of typing in the GPS coordinates. So if we go back to the photogrammetry episode you guys did a while ago, if you're out in the field with a camera and just a GPS and you're taking pictures of finds or of sites that you see, it's actually great for that. You can go into the program, download a map, which granted does take a while. That is another teething problem. You can write the descriptions for it, and you can actually take the finds, the pictures of whatever you have, and throw those in, because you can also use pictures from outside sources. You can upload pictures into the app, and then you can export it as a KML, a CSV and a GPX file type. But if you're using MapInfo, CSV is the only file type you can open in MapInfo. So
Okay.
I don't know about the other two. You can use those in ArcGIS or not.
Nice. Well, one thing that we didn't mention that I'll mention now because you're talking about it is the Surface Pro 4 does not come with GPS. I don't think any of the Surface Pros come with GPS installed. It's not like even an option you can get, unlike other tablets which do have GPS inside. Those are usually cellular-enabled tablets that come with a GPS antenna, with a cell antenna, which, if correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure you can't get these cell-enabled either. They're pure Wi-Fi devices, right?
No, as far as I know, yeah. I haven't looked into it much. I just looked at the Surface Pro. I didn't look at just the one that's called the Surface, so maybe you can with those. I don't know.
Right, maybe. But that being said, I did test out last week the Trimble R1, and there's a number of devices out there, but the Trimble R1 is a Bluetooth sub-meter add-on, which there's no reason it wouldn't work on this. Anything you can connect to Bluetooth, the R1 should work on. Now, it does require you to download an application, like on my my iPhone and my iPad. I had to download an application to set up the R1, which Trimble is all Windows anyway. I'm surprised they even had Apple applications, so there's probably something to download for the Surface Pro that you could get that to work. And then whatever you're using coordinates on, you should be getting sub-meter coordinates with that device. And also, you should be able to find other devices out there that maybe aren't sub-meter and aren't $2,000 that will just give you coordinates, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
maybe even something that plugs in via the USB port, just like a GPS antenna.
Yeah, that would probably be possible. I didn't have enough time to check that out, but I'll definitely have to do that for next time. So thanks for the suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's go quickly into another application here. I'm simply just going to talk about OneNote because I'd never used it before. Like I said, I'm not a Windows person. I knew about OneNote, but I'd never actually used it. And it keeps coming up every time I accidentally hit the button on the pen, like I said, the eraser button, and it opens OneNote automatically. And I think the reason I didn't like it was it almost looks too simple when you open it up, but it's actually quite powerful. You have a number of drawing tools. You can do easy shape recognition, which it does a fairly decent job at. So if you draw a square, it'll change that into a perfect square, or a circle turns into a circle. And then you can resize those. You can take any text that you draw in here and resize it. You can type into it. If you just use the text button and you tap where you want to type, you can just type right on it. So you can take notes, and then you can draw on your notes. One thing I did just the other day was there's a button on here that will allow me to, the insert button, which will allow me to use the camera or just a picture. And I took, we were doing some theorizing on some app development stuff, and I wanted to take a series of pictures on the whiteboards that we were writing on. And it's got a whiteboard mode on the camera, which I've used in Evernote before on my iPad. And this worked really well. It actually picked up the whiteboard, chopped off all the edges, so all I had was the whiteboard, and it actually OCR'd, which is, character recognized a lot of the words on the whiteboard, even though they were written by people with extremely poor handwriting. But and then I was able to just draw on those as well with multicolors. So it's pretty handy, and you can they're searchable. The OneNote system saves notes across the Microsoft platforms via their what's their cloud service called? Is it just called what is that called?
It's called OneDrive, and that comes standard on the Surface Pro as well, which I use heavily. I really love that. I prefer that to Google Drive, actually.
Nice. Yeah, I've used it a little bit. I haven't had to use it much because this is my only Windows device, but I have used it to store stuff in here just to have a little bit of a little bit of security that it's not actually sitting on my Surface, because, let's be honest, this is running Windows 10 and it could crash and die at any time. So,
True.
I've gotten used to just, ever since I got a Dropbox Pro account or Dropbox Business account, I've got 5 terabytes of cloud space on Dropbox now, and I don't store any. I mean, I've got a 1 terabyte hard drive on my iMac here, and I don't store anything on it. Everything's in Dropbox, and it's also in the 4 terabyte RAID storage device I've got hooked to my computer. So literally nothing is on there except the operating system and the programs. And I do the same thing on the Surface. Being only a 256 gigabyte hard drive, you can probably fill that up pretty quick with if you're mapping, or like I'm doing the podcast stuff on it, things like that. But I store everything in Dropbox, or you can store everything in OneDrive if you're in the Microsoft ecosystem, or for that matter, Google Drive if you're in the Google system. So whatever you want to do, you can store it there.
And the best part is you can install Google Drive on your
Yes.
on your Surface Pro, and you can pick which files you want downloaded. I don't know if you can do that on the iPad, so I should probably be careful waving my banner around.
Well, so I can't speak to Google Drive, but I can speak about Dropbox. Dropbox on the iPad doesn't actually store anything on your iPad unless you specifically tell it in an individual file basis. I want this for local storage. Otherwise, it always pulls everything from the cloud. Now, the other thing is, since this isn't treated like a tablet by most applications, it's treated like a desktop. Dropbox installs on this the same way Dropbox installs on any other desktop, which means I can do a selective sync on it, which I have to. I mean, I have almost 2 terabytes of information in my Dropbox account, so I only selectively sync the folders that I want to use on the Surface. So I sync a couple, some of my podcast folders that have template files in them and template graphics and things like that. When I actually finish a podcast and it's recorded, it's posted, I move that to an archive folder I've got in Dropbox so it doesn't sync to my devices that don't have the memory capacity for it. And then it's just stored on Dropbox. And anything else I don't need there, I've got some business information on there. Anything I want to have access to pretty much all the time, I'll selectively sync to the device, but it's also stored on Dropbox. So, and I'm sure you can do a similar thing with OneDrive. If you have a larger OneDrive account, if you got like a terabyte in there, you can probably selective sync on that too. But I'm not sure. Can you selective sync on that? I'm sure you can.
Yeah, you can. The only thing is that if you save something locally on OneDrive, it does upload to the OneDrive, but it doesn't just upload and then disappears. You have to then tell your OneDrive that I don't want this on my computer. Just send this up to the cloud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the same with Dropbox. If I create something on this device and I save it to Dropbox, it's going to be on this device. It's not just gonna,
okay.
Yeah, unless I save it to Dropbox via the web browser. If I drag it into the web version of Dropbox, that will go to the cloud and I can save it to a folder that's not synced to this device. But if I just save it to my top level Dropbox or something, or create a new folder, I'll have to go in and change my selective sync settings and say, you know what, I actually don't want this stored here. Just keep it on Dropbox. So
yeah,
I think that's
Same
relatively
here.
common. Yeah. So, all right. Well, it sounds like there's plenty of options for people, depending on what you want to do. And like I said, I'm going to go right out and say it. This is definitely a laptop replacement. And not only that, but a decent device for taking in the field too, because despite my reservations with the on-screen keyboard, on-screen keyboards are essential for field use because, for one thing, you've got one less piece of gear, especially if you're on an excavation and you can set up a keyboard, that's probably handier, and I would probably recommend that. But if you're in a situation like field survey, like we do often in the United States here, and there's just no feasible location for you to just sit down and pull out your keyboard, we did that. Chris is familiar with that. We did that on our projects in Southern California last year, where we just typed on the screen because there's nowhere you're just going to sit down and type, right? So, I'd say it's a pretty good device for that. But it does have open ports all the way around the top of this for cooling, which means if you're taking it into the field, definitely put a case on it because you're going to want to seal those up. That being said, one last thing before we get to Chris. Philip, in your case, now you work in the UK where heat's not necessarily a problem, but since your ports are closed up like that with the case on there, did you ever have any overheating issues?
Mine aren't actually closed up. There's like small holes in the top, just just enough that the fans or that it will blow the air out for you.
Okay.
So I don't have any trouble with that at all. I mean, the only reason my Surface Pro ever gets hot is if I heavily use it while it's charging. Then you can definitely feel the area where the battery starts heating up. So, but other than that, I don't have any problems.
Okay. That reminds me of 2 more things I want to mention. The charging capability. This has got a funky proprietary plug on it, which I hate.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mind how the plug goes in. I like that, but I don't like that. I've got a bunch of external batteries that have USB ports on them that I use. I've got actually one that's a 30,000 milliamp battery that I carry with me. Like at the conference. I mean, I charged that thing up before I went home, and I never charged it again. And I can get like 8 full charges on my iPhone out of that, and several on my iPad. But couldn't charge the Surface Pro. Still had to plug that thing old school style right into the wall because they've got some funky proprietary plug that I couldn't plug anything into. So,
yeah, that is a big issue actually. Now that you mention it.
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and I hate it. And one other thing I want to mention, since we're talking about downloading apps, if you're used to tablets, which you'll treat this like a tablet the minute you get it, tablets often have their own app stores, and it's usually, unless, I mean, I guess if you're used to Android, maybe this isn't a problem, but with Apple, you download everything from the Apple App Store, right? I mean, that's where you get stuff. But this is a computer. So there is a Microsoft store, but there still are a lot of people, like QGIS, for example. You can't download QGIS from the store, from the Microsoft store. You download that from the QGIS website, which means you also have all the standard problems that desktop computers has. You're probably going to need some sort of virus protection software at some point. I actually don't have that on mine yet. And be cautious of what you're doing and what you're downloading from the internet, because this is a computer, a desktop computer with that kind of operating system. So and it is
Windows.
And it is Windows. People like to destroy it. So
yeah.
All right. Well, we've gushed on enough about the Surface Pro. Chris, as a non-Surface Pro user, what are some?
Tear us a new one.
Yeah. What are some of your issues that you've heard so far?
Well, that's perfect timing. I just got out of driving through a tunnel, so I'm back into reception again.
Nice.
Well, I just have some concerns about its real practicality as a sealed tablet, because with the need for open ports for the cooling fans, like we take it into dusty areas, whether that's the Mojave Desert or like anywhere where there's dirt flying from a excavation, and then also like humid areas like say the UK or Mesoamerica or the Southeast. I could see that adversely affecting the Surface Pro. And then also you had just mentioned the proprietary charging thing, like that makes it not that practical. And then you had said recently that the on-screen keyboard is workable, although irritating. But earlier in this segment, Philip had mentioned that there are quite a few programs where the on-screen keyboard doesn't exactly like mesh well with the user interface. And so whether it's just the interface or the user experience, it sounds like maybe the Surface Pro is a little bit more irritating to use than it's worth. And then also the final nail in the coffin for me at least is the survivability of that pencil. It sounds like it's pretty fragile and maybe a little bit not that practical to be lugging around in the field with you. So I don't know. I'm not saying any of those things to necessarily trump up the use of iPads over Surface Pro. I think that iPads have some limitations of their own as well, but those are things to think about when you're looking at the Surface Pro as a laptop replacement, because it might be a decent laptop replacement, but we don't take laptops into the field for a reason. And, maybe that's another reason why we won't take Surface Pros into certain applications of field work. So I don't know. Those are just like things of warning that I've picked up on from y'all's review of this. What do you guys think?
Can I touch on the pen just shortly?
Yeah, go ahead.
Like you said with the tip, it does seem that it is prone to falling out. I've dropped my pen a few times and not ruined the tip. I guess it's just, luck of the draw how you drop it. I think the reason my tip fell out is primarily because if I find out that something's loose, I just like to sit and play with it all day. So that might be the warrant of death for my pen tip. But that is a problem. I will also say I have had problems with the pen, especially in OneNote, where for some reason it just either constantly follows the pen tip, even if I lift it up, or if it gets too close, it'll draw like really thin lines, or it just stops working altogether. And sometimes you can kind of work that around by unscrewing the back and then screwing it on again, because it is a battery that's in the center of it, which is a 4A battery, so those are actually hard to find. And then some days you need to restart the dang thing like 2 or 3 times before it actually works. So that is quite the drawback, especially for what we're using it for. where we don't necessarily have the time for stuff like this to fail while we're out in the field. As far as your concerns about the dust and the humidity, I'll get back to you when I've tried that a little bit more, especially the humidity part. But I can definitely, see that is a problem. So maybe, I don't know, maybe someday we'll see a hardcore version of the Surface Pro, but for now, that is definitely a big problem that we need to fix.
Yeah, I guess one last complaint that I have of the Surface Pro is the price point.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's one of those things where you can take it into the field, but the price point that is carried along with that makes it something that you don't want to take risks with, whereas like a iPad mini or any of the other iPads, you know, the price point is such that, yeah, it's a bummer if you lose an iPad in the field or if it gets destroyed, but it's not like a catastrophic financial loss. But it's one of those things with the Surface Pro where it's like, you know, you don't really have $2,000 to just, you know, drop on a rock.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. And I'm looking right now on Microsoft's website. So the 256 gigabyte Core Intel i5 with 8 gigabytes of RAM that I got is retailing without tax or a keyboard for $1,299. If you bump up to the i7 with 16 gigs of RAM, that's $1,799. Okay. And that's still only a 256 gigabyte hard drive. Now let's go to the, you can go to the customize your device button here. And I think you can do a couple more add-ons, but, you know, it's like you said, it's not the cheapest device. However, the Surface 3s, like I see a Surface 3 here starting at $499. If you want some of the, you know, because now the 4 is out, so the 3 is cheaper, like everything works. And if you want some of the functionality of a desktop in a laptop in the field, and the programs you're going to run are going to work on that, so maybe the 3 is the way to go. But I will address some of your questions, Chris. As far as durability, you're totally right. I mean, from a laptop standpoint, a lot of laptops are not running. They still have optical hard drives in them, and they don't have SSD drives in them, solid-state drives. This is a completely solid-state device, so it is going to be durable from that standpoint, from just like knocking around in your backpack standpoint. Now, one of the things I've been looking at the Surface for, which we're going to do some testing on here probably in the next couple months, is, you know, I'm working with the Center for Digital Archaeology on an app called Codify that's going to replace, Chris, what you and I used in the field, tap forms. But and Codify can run independently on all the tablets that we're going to put it on. However, one of the best ways to run it, which is not always feasible on a survey project, you can do this on an excavation, but one of the best ways to use it is with a file server. So you've got another computer that's jamming out a Wi-Fi signal that's running all day long, that all your tablets are constant communication with. But the problem with that, of course, is who wants to carry around a file server computer? You know, if you're on an excavation, you can just set it up to run, and then all your tablets, as you create information, they're constantly exchanging back and forth, and everybody's staying updated, and everything's staying backed up on the file server. But with the Surface Pro, if you were to shut off like the Bluetooth, shut off the shut off the screen, shut off everything, and make it so the device doesn't shut itself off completely, and just throw that in a rugged case in your backpack, it will probably run all day long for a complete workday. Because realistically, work days are 6 or 7 hours of actual work. You know, there's a lot of drive time involved and things like that. So, I mean, even if you were on a 10-hour day and you had like an 8 or 9 hour workday, I'm pretty sure just operating as a file server where you didn't have to interact with the device at all, this would be a fantastic thing for that. Now, this is all theory right now, so I'll report back on that later. But and another thing I think it'd be good for is excavation, especially for drawing. It's a nice big surface. The pen is incredibly precise. You get a nice app on there that you can actually do some high quality excavation drawings where you can take the photo and then draw right on top of the device and do all that kind of stuff in the field. I think that'd be fantastic. But you're right, you'd have to be careful with it if you're setting it next to your unit and you're slinging dirt all over the place. You know, it's going to have the same issues as any other device would. That being said, I don't think I would ever replace the iPads in the field with this for the basic use that we were using them for, Chris. You know, your standard site recording and survey and stuff like that. The iPads are they're the right size, they're robust. I don't need something this big. It's the reason I didn't get the Pro. I just didn't need something that big for generic field use. But it does have its specific uses that I think nothing else can really beat. Nothing else can really beat it on. I think it's really it's a useful tool for that. I mean, it's somewhat naive these days to think that one device can solve all of your problems, which is why I bought it. And people that know me as a Mac person were kind of surprised to see me show up with a Microsoft device. But I was. I know. Well, I looked at that. I mean, I'm sitting here staring at two 27-inch iMac displays and 4 tablets. So, you know, I mean, I'm definitely a Mac person because I like what they do for me, but I also realize where I have a deficiency. And if some other device, I'm not going to be so, I'm going to be a scientist and a skeptic on that. And I'm going to say, listen, this is just going to work better for this specific application, and it's worth it for me to go pick it up. So, yeah.
If I can say something with the iPads as well. Just in general, from what I've heard from listening to your podcast, the big problem I could definitely see with the Windows Surface Pro as well, which Chris didn't mention, but the big problem right now is that the Windows Store, while it does have a store, the apps that are available are quite limited. And when I tried looking up some of the stuff that you guys mentioned for your iPads, it just doesn't come up because the Windows app market is, I think, 5% of the total, just if we're looking phones, the phone market. So there's no real great benefit for app developers to go, oh yeah, sure, we'll make it for Windows as well. So I think where the Surface Pro will definitely have a strength is that installing normal computer programs on it. But if you're looking at it as an app device, just go with an iPad instead. And I'm saying that as a guy who's never used a Mac in my life, and at least not actively.
Nice. Well, if I ever end up in the UK, I'll let you use my iPad for a couple minutes. Change your life, Philip.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm such an advocate. I let all my field crew keep their iPad minis that they used in the field, because I'm an evangelist for good devices. So, but that being said, I'm also promoting the Surface Pro 4. I'm not saying I've had a lot of issues with it that I've reported in this podcast, but that being said, it does have its uses that only it can do. I don't have any other device that can do some of the things that this can do, and it's really saved my ass on a lot of stuff. It was amazing to have for the SAAs in what I was doing with it, and I think there's some other applications that we're inventing for it in the next couple of months that are just going to be like nothing else can do this. Like literally nothing else can do it. So let's mention that podcast app real quick at the end here. We've gone long on this podcast anyway, but let's just mention it real fast because I want to know more about it because I might look it up. So go ahead, Philip.
All right, cool. Well, the most important app that I could think of for my Surface Pro or just any Windows 10 machine in general is what's called the Grover Podcast app, which has a free version and a paid version as well. And it is probably the best app I've used so far for podcasts. I've used the one for my phone, which is Windows 8.1, and it works, but it's not as great as this one is. And for anybody looking for a replacement to iTunes and their podcast section on iTunes, it's not a complete replacement, but it is definitely preferable to use to the one in iTunes, I feel anyways. And the most important function of it is that you can actually subscribe to the Archaeology podcast network, as well as the Stone Pages Archaeo News, the oldest prehistoric news podcast in the world. So, that is the most important thing. If you get a Windows Surface Pro, get that one first and then subscribe to us, because you'll have so much joy out of it from that standpoint.
Nice. And it's especially good to subscribe to Stone Pages because David Connolly was almost famous for this. And I'm sure Philip is keeping up the tradition, but there's nearly always a Stonehenge article.
The past two I've made, I haven't been able to, mostly because of the fact that the people from Stonehenge haven't been putting out anything good to talk about. But I do try, and I always do mention if we are lacking a Stonehenge story, and I try to make that up with some other megalithic monument-related story instead. So I do what I can.
Nice. Well, if you are lacking in some Stonehenge information from the Stone Pages podcast, go check out the Archie Fantasies podcast. I believe episode 33 or 32. Yeah, 33.
I think so. Yeah,
is Stonehenge. So they covered Stonehenge for an hour. So go check that out. All right. Well, we're going to end this one right here. Thanks a lot, guys. And if you've got any fun apps or useful tips and tricks that you have for the Surface Pro 4, let any one of us know. Our contact information will be in the show notes. And you can also leave a comment on the show notes page on the archaeologypodcastnetwork.com Facebook page and on the Facebook page and ArcPodNet on Twitter. So with that, we'll sign off from this and enjoy and go spend your life savings on a Surface Pro 4.
All right, cool.
Or don't and get an iPad.
Yeah, exactly.
No, get a Windows Surface Pro. But guys, thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor to be on the show. I love listening to the Archaeotech podcast and just the network in general. You guys produce some absolutely fantastic shows.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, man. It's good to hear.
Thank you so much, Philip.
No worries.
That's it for another episode of the Archaeotech podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Archaeotech. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for this episode. You can also email us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag Archaeotech or tag @ArcPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to this show wherever you saw it. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.